The HOA built 42 resort cabins on my land, right on the spot where I scattered my wife's ashes. The HOA president just smirked, waved some fake documents in my face, and told me I was the one trespassing. But here's the part they never saw coming. I didn't stop them. In fact, I let them finish construction. I watched them build every single wall, landscape every path, and start renting out the cabins for a fortune. They thought they had beaten me, but they had no idea my revenge plan was already in motion, and that every shovel of dirt was just burying them deeper in a trap they built themselves. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, because this takedown is epic. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit subscribe, so you don't miss the moment justice is finally served. It started with a splash of orange. I was having my morning coffee on the porch, same as I've done for 20 years, looking out over the North Ridge. The land slopes up there, meeting a line of old pines before it drops off toward the lake. That's where I saw them, little plastic flags on thin metal wires fluttering in the breeze, and not just flags. There were pink spray paint markings on the ground, forming a long, straight line that cut right across my property. I've owned this land my whole adult life. 30 acres, free and clear. My granddad bought it back in the 30s, paid cash from a good year of logging. The deed is as clean as a whistle, folded up right in my desk drawer. So, when I see stakes in my ground, I want to know who put them there. I walked out, the damp grass soaking the cuffs of my jeans. Up close, I could see they had hammered wooden stakes in every 50 feet or so. I pulled one up. It had survey markings on it, fresh ones. A couple of guys in hard hats and bright yellow vests were unloading equipment from a pickup truck a few hundred yards away, well inside my fence line. I headed over, keeping my pace steady. No sense getting worked up until you know what you're worked up about. I gave them a nod. Morning, can I ask what all this is for? The younger one just shrugged, busy untangling a chain. The older one, a guy with a sunburnt neck and a tired look in his eyes, wiped his forehead with the back of a glove. HOA's resort expansion, he said, not even looking at me. Putting in some cabins. Permits are all pulled. He said it like he was telling me the time of day. Like it was the most normal thing in the world to start a construction project on another man's land, without so much as a phone call. I felt a cold knot form in my gut. HOA, the Bluffs. They were a new development, a collection of fancy houses on the other side of the lake, full of people who thought owning a quarter-acre lot made them land barons. Just then, a golf cart came zipping up the dirt path my granddad cut 80 years ago. A woman with a haircut that looked like a helmet and a clipboard pressed to her chest hopped out. She had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I knew who she was before she even opened her mouth. Karen Mallory, HOA president. She sold real estate and acted like she ran the whole county. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She was talking to me, on my own land. "You can tell me why your men are on my property," I said, keeping my voice level. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh, you must be Mr. Brenner. You're mistaken. This little strip here is part of the Bluffs HOA's new Phase 2 development. It's all been surveyed and filed." I just stood there for a second. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I went back to my house, pulled that old dog-eared deed from its envelope in the desk, and walked right back out. I unfolded it and held it out for her to see. The lines were drawn in old ink, the descriptions written out in a fine, cursive hand. You could see the surveyor's seal from 1934. She didn't even glance at it. She just waved a dismissive hand, like she was shooing away a fly. "That's ancient history," she said, with another one of those empty smiles. "Things get updated. You'll have to talk to our legal department if you have a problem." She turned to her workers and started pointing, telling them where to stage the lumber. I just stood there, holding that piece of paper. That northern ridge she called a little strip is where I scattered my wife Eleanor's ashes 3 years ago. It was her favorite spot. She loved to watch the sunset over the lake from up there. We had plans, before she got sick, to build a small retreat on that ridge, a quiet place for veterans and their families to come and decompress. Her ashes were mixed with the soil up there, under the pines. And this woman was about to pour concrete all over it. The fight started slow, and it was all on her side. A week later, I got a notice from code enforcement, an anonymous complaint about my tool shed being out of compliance with county aesthetic standards. My tool shed. The one I built with my own 2 hands 30 years ago. The one that's stronger than any of those particle board mansions in her development. Then, HOA signs appeared right next to my fence. Future home of the Bluffs Lakeside Cabins. They were deliberately placed to be in every photo if I tried to document their work. It was a petty psychological game. I drove down to the county land office, hoping a little common sense would prevail. I waited for 45 minutes to talk to a clerk who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I spread my deed out on the counter, showed him my property tax records going back decades. He just nodded slowly, typed a few things into his computer, and then shrugged. Looks like they filed a new plat map last year, sir. According to this, their survey shows their line extends another 100 yards. I told him their survey was wrong. He gave me a tired look. That may be, but it's a civil matter. Happens all the time. You'll have to get lawyers involved. He said it so casually, as if getting lawyers involved was like picking up milk from the store. He was telling me that the piece of paper in my hand, the one that represented my family's entire history on this land, meant nothing until a judge said it did. I went home feeling a deep, quiet rage building inside me. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was about bullies in golf carts thinking they can just erase history with a new map and a smug smile. The next Monday, I woke up to a sound that rattles you right down to your bones. The low rumble of diesel engines. I went to the window and my heart sank. 2 massive bulldozers were idling right at the edge of the tree line, their metal tracks already chewing up the grass. They were about to cross the line. They were about to drive right over my wife's resting place. I grabbed the phone and called the sheriff's department. I was an Army engineer for 25 years. I believe in order, in rules. I believed if I just showed them the proof, they'd see the truth. A deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, a young kid who looked barely old enough to shave. Karen was right there to meet him, clipboard in hand, already talking. She pointed to a map she had, a crisp new printout. She pointed to my old fence. I explained the situation calmly, showed him my deed. He listened, nodded, and then walked over to his car to look at the map on his laptop. He came back a few minutes later, avoiding my eyes. He pointed to a spot on Karen's map. "Sir, I'm sorry, but according to the plat map on file with the county, your property line ends back there, at that old fence." He pointed 100 yards behind me. "Technically," he said, shifting his weight, "you're the one standing on their property right now." The deputy's taillights disappeared down my long gravel driveway, and a moment later, the bulldozers roared to life. The sound was a physical thing, a vibration that came up through the soles of my boots and settled deep in my chest. I just stood there and watched as the first machine lowered its blade and scraped away the topsoil, churning the green grass and wildflowers into a muddy brown wound. They worked fast. These weren't amateurs, they were a professional crew. Within hours, they had leveled the entire ridge where Eleanor's ashes were scattered. I didn't watch that part. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the table we'd built together from an old oak that fell in a storm, and I just listened. The sounds of destruction carried on the wind all day. By the end of the week, they were pouring concrete. Forms went up, rebar cages were dropped in, and then the big trucks came, one after another, backing up and spewing gray sludge into the trenches they'd dug. It felt like they were pouring concrete right into my soul. 2 weeks into the construction, a man in a cheap suit knocked on my door. He handed me an envelope and said, "You've been served," before practically sprinting back to his car. It was a cease and desist order, not for them, for me. It was from the HOA's lawyer, claiming that I was creating a hostile environment and encroaching on their new development by maintaining a fence that was, according to them, on their property. I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. They were accusing me of the very thing they were doing. It was upside-down world. The letter that followed a few days later was even better. It was a formal demand that I immediately remove all hostile materials from their property line, which included my private property signs, the old barbed wire fence my granddad put up, and, I quote, "any other intimidating fixtures." A week later, 2 cameras appeared on tall poles they had erected, both pointed directly at my house and my workshop. Every time I stepped out my front door, a little red light blinked. They were watching me. On my own land, they were treating me like the intruder. I thought, surely someone else must see how wrong this is. Most of the other homes bordering my property were part of a different, older community. I walked over to see a neighbor, a retired fella named George I'd known for years. I laid it all out for him, showed him my deed. He just shook his head, looking at the ground. "Jack, I hear you, I do," he said, his voice low. "But that Mallory woman, she's got the whole HOA board wrapped around her finger. You fight her, she'll find a way to make your life miserable. Fines for the grass being too long, complaints about your dog barking. It's not worth it. A lot of folks around here are on a fixed income. They're scared of her. My advice? Just let it go." I talked to 3 other families, got the same story. They saw the injustice, but they were too afraid to stick their necks out. I was on my own. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of Eleanor. I remembered us standing up on that ridge just after I'd retired from the army. She'd leaned against me, looking out at the water as the sun went down, turning the whole lake to gold. "This is it, Jack," she'd said. "This is the place. A little lodge right here. Nothing fancy, just a quiet spot for the boys to come home to. A place where they can hear the birds instead of the ringing in their ears." That was her dream, a retreat for veterans. She'd already started sketching out floor plans. That dream was now buried under foundation slabs for 42 identical cabins. It was an insult to her memory. It was the one line they couldn't be allowed to cross. As the weeks turned into months, the cabins rose up from the foundations. Framing, sheathing, roofing, they went up like a row of little wooden soldiers. At night, after the crews went home, I'd walk the perimeter. The glow from their construction lights polluted the dark sky I'd known my whole life. Sometimes I could hear music and laughter. They had started renting out the first few completed units before the rest were even finished. I pulled up the listing on my phone. "The Bluffs Lakeside Escape," the headline read. Photos showed smiling families on brand new decks, grilling hot dogs. The description was the real kicker. "Enjoy exclusive access to our private lake, perfect for fishing and kayaking. Their private lake, my granddad's lake. The nightly rate was $400 a night to trespass." Finally, the summons for a preliminary hearing arrived. They were filing for a permanent injunction against me. The day of court, I walked in alone. The room was small, stuffy. Karen Mallory was there with her whole board, all of them looking smug and self-assured in their blazers and sensible shoes. Their lawyer was a slick guy with perfect hair who probably charged more per hour than my first house cost. He stood up and spoke to the judge with an easy confidence, presenting their new survey as if it were gospel. He painted me as a confused, stubborn old man clinging to an outdated map, refusing to accept progress. The judge, a woman who looked overworked and impatient, leaned forward, studying their documents. I watched her nod along as their lawyer made his case. She looked over at me, her expression a mixture of pity and annoyance. Everyone in that room thought I was a pathetic old fool about to lose everything. The HOA board was whispering and smiling behind their hands. Karen Mallory was practically glowing with victory. I lowered my head and stared at the worn wooden floor, letting them all see the image of a defeated man. And in that moment of silence, as the whole room waited for the judge to rule against me, I felt a calm settle over me. I wasn't defeated. I was just getting started. I walked out of that courthouse and didn't look back. The judge hadn't made a final ruling, just set a date for a full hearing weeks away. But I saw the look on her face. I saw the smug confidence on Karen Mallory's. In their world, the person with the newest, shiniest piece of paper wins. My old deed was a relic. They had a fresh survey, a team of lawyers, and 42 reasons why they were right already rising from the ground. Defeated? No. I was done playing by their rules. As an old engineer, I knew one thing. If you can't win by arguing, you win by letting the other guy's shoddy work collapse on its own. It was time to go back to the beginning. Not my beginning, but the land's. A few days later, I was back at the county records office. Not at the front counter this time, but in the musty basement where they kept the old archives. A young man was behind the desk, hunched over a laptop. He looked up when I came in, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. I introduced myself. "My name's Jack. Brenner, I believe I knew your grandfather. We served together in the 7th Engineer Battalion." The kid's face lit up. "You knew my Grandpa Denton?" We talked for a few minutes about the old man, a good-hearted sergeant who could build a bridge under fire and still have a joke ready. The kid's name was Corey. He was a part-time intern, mostly just scanning old documents to digitize them. He was smart, curious, and he missed his granddad. When I told him what the HOA was doing, I saw a familiar fire in his eyes. It was the Denton sense of fairness kicking in. For the next 2 weeks, Corey and I spent every spare moment in that basement. He showed me how to use the microfiche readers and navigate the county's archaic digital system. We were ghost hunters, looking for the shadows of old property lines. We went back past the HOA's shiny new plat map, past the development plans from the 90s. We went all the way back, and we found it. The original master plat for the entire region, drawn in 1932. My family's 30-acre parcel was clearly marked, its boundaries defined by stone markers and the shoreline of the lake. The land the HOA was building on wasn't a forgotten strip. It was the heart of my property. Their whole development, the bluffs, was drawn up decades later, its property line stopping neatly at my grandfather's fence. Corey found something else, too. The surveying firm that had created the HOA's new map, the one that magically gifted them my northern ridge. It was owned by Karen Mallory's brother-in-law. It wasn't just a mistake, it had the stink of a planned-out theft. The real prize came a few days later, buried in a box of unfiled deeds from the 1950s. It was a quitclaim deed from 1959. A neighboring farmer had tried to claim a section of the ridge for grazing rights, and my father had taken him to court and won. This document, signed by a judge, explicitly reaffirmed my family's ownership of the entire ridge, all the way to the water's edge. It was the smoking gun, a legal court-ordered document that nobody had bothered to digitize. I held it in my hands, a fragile piece of history that proved I was right. But as I stood there, a sobering thought hit me. This piece of paper was powerful, but they had foundations, framing, and plumbing. They had millions of dollars sunk into the ground. A judge might see this deed and just order them to pay me for the land. But this wasn't about money. This was about Eleanor. This was about what was right. So I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Nothing, publicly at least. I let the construction continue. I watched them put up drywall, install windows, lay down roofing shingles. The HOA board thought they had me beaten into submission. Karen would sometimes drive by my house in her golf cart and give me a pitying little wave. They had no idea that my war had just begun. My first move was to find the right weapon. I didn't need another lawyer. I needed a specialist. I found her name after a week of research, Anita Flores, a licensed boundary surveyor, Navy veteran, with a reputation for being surgically precise and absolutely brutal in court. Her reports were considered bulletproof. When I met her, she was all business, a firm handshake, direct eyes. She didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out my old deed, the master plat, and the quitclaim deed on her table. She studied them for a full 10 minutes without saying a word, her finger tracing the old lines. Finally, she looked up. "They're not just over the line, Mr. Brenner," she said, her voice flat and certain. "They've built a commercial resort in your backyard. When do you want me to start?" With Anita quietly doing her work, taking her own precise measurements in the early morning hours before the crews arrived, I made my next move. I typed up a formal notice citing the 1959 quitclaim deed and the original plat map. It was a simple letter: cease all development immediately, pending resolution of a land title dispute. I sent it via registered mail to the HOA's main office. A week later, the little green receipt card came back to me in the mail, signed by their secretary. They had received it. They knew, and they did nothing. The construction didn't even slow down. They were so arrogant, so sure of their position, that they threw my warning in the trash. That signature on that little green card was the single most expensive mistake Karen Mallory ever made. That night, after the workers had left, I walked out onto the construction site. It was quiet, the skeletons of the cabins lit by a few security lights. I stepped inside one of the nearly finished units. The air smelled of fresh paint and cut pine. I looked up at the vaulted ceiling. Then I pulled a small tape measure from my pocket, extended it, and measured the distance from the floor to the highest point of the main beam. I wrote the number down in a little notebook, then went to the next cabin and did the same, and the next. They were all identical. I clicked my tape measure shut, a faint smile on my face for the first time in months. The whole time, they thought they were building their dream resort. They had no idea they were actually building my evidence, one perfectly measured board at a time. I looked up at the ceiling one last time and whispered to the empty room, "Just tall enough." Their response to my registered letter wasn't a phone call or a legal discussion. It was a hammer. A few days after they signed for my notice, another man in a cheap suit showed up, this time with a sheriff's deputy in tow. He served me with a temporary restraining order. I was now legally barred from setting foot on the construction site, the land that belonged to me. The order accused me of harassment and intimidation. They were twisting the narrative, painting me as the aggressor. The next day, I got a fine in the mail from the HOA for $500. The charge? Trespassing. They fined me for walking on my own property. The arrogance was stunning. It was like they were daring me to fight back in a way they could see, a way they understood. They wanted noise. They wanted anger. I gave them silence. The petty attacks ramped up. The HOA had a compliance officer, a guy named Martin Tully, who acted like he was a retired general, but was actually a failed postal inspector. He started driving by my house 2 or 3 times a day in his golf cart, slowing down to take pictures of my yard with his phone. He left a notice on my door for having a non-approved garden hose visible from the road. The road he was referring to was my private driveway. Then came a noise complaint. A neighbor I'd never had a problem with filed a report with the county saying my workshop tools were too loud in the mornings. I knew Karen had put him up to it. I'd seen her talking to him on his porch the day before. The whole thing was a performance, a show of force designed to wear me down, to make me feel isolated and powerless. Even my own family started to doubt me. My niece, Sarah, who lived a few towns over, called me in tears. "Uncle Jack, I heard what's happening. Please just sell the land. You're too old to be fighting these people. What if they try something worse? Just move closer to us." I understood her concern came from a place of love, but it felt like another jab. In the eyes of the world, I was the one who was wrong. The local newspaper sealed it. They ran a big glossy article in the Sunday edition. Bluffs Phase 2 launches Lakeside Escape, a boon for local tourism. There was a picture of Karen Mallory cutting a ribbon in front of one of the cabins, smiling that venomous smile of hers, surrounded by the rest of the board. The article quoted her extensively, going on about community and revitalization and providing luxury experiences. She called the project a dream come true. My land, my wife's memory, her dream come true. I read the article sitting on my porch, watching the contractors lay sod and plant perfectly manicured shrubs around the brand new decks. They were adding the finishing touches. Landscaping, docks that stretched out into my lake. They were polishing a stolen jewel and showing it off to the whole world. I watched them work every day, and I didn't say a word. I let them finish every single cabin. I watched them connect the power, install the plumbing, pave the little walking paths. Every dollar they spent was another nail in their own coffin. Then came the final act of desecration. It was a cool morning in late fall. Corey called me from the records office, his voice tight. "Jack, you need to see this." He sent me a link to the HOA's latest construction update video on their website. It showed a small concrete crew with a jackhammer breaking up something at the corner of the property, right where the old boundary line met the main road. I knew what it was before the video. Zoomed in. It was a square chunk of granite, about the size of a shoebox, set deep in the earth. My grandfather's cornerstone. He'd chiseled his initials and the year, 1934, into the top of it himself. It was the original survey marker, the physical proof of where my land began. The video showed them smashing it to pieces, then smoothing over the spot with fresh black asphalt for their new entryway. "They buried it, Jack," Corey said quietly over the phone. "It's gone." They hadn't just ignored the boundary, they had deliberately destroyed the evidence of it, and they were proud enough to post a video of their crime online. That evening, a hard, cold rain began to fall. I walked out in it, letting the water soak my jacket, and stood at the edge of my driveway, looking at the glowing lights of their finished resort. It was perfect. A picturesque little village of cabins, ready for a lifetime of paying guests. Any other man might have broken right then. But as the rain ran down my face, I felt that strange calm settle over me again. Some men fight with fists. Some men fight with filings and angry phone calls. I waited. and I watched. And I let my enemy build my victory for me. I walked back to my house, the mud squelching under my boots. I went into my office, sat down at my desk, and opened a thick accordion folder. Inside was everything. My grandfather's original deed, the 1959 quitclaim order, high-resolution aerial drone photos I'd taken weekly, showing their construction creeping past the true property line. And on top, a thick spiral-bound report from Anita Flores, full of diagrams, measurements, and legal citations, all notarized and stamped with her official seal. It was a masterpiece of irrefutable fact. I picked up the folder, walked out to my old pickup truck, and placed it carefully on the passenger seat. The rain was letting up. It was time. The day of the full hearing felt different. The air in the county civil court was thick with a kind of cheap perfume and overconfidence. The room was packed. On one side, Karen Mallory and her entire HOA board, sitting in the front row like they were at a theater premiere. Her lawyer, the one with the perfect hair, was shuffling papers and smiling. On my side, there was just me, in the same worn tweed jacket I wore to Eleanor's funeral. I caught Karen's eye for a moment. She gave me a slow, pitying smile, the kind you'd give a dog you're about to put down. She saw a lonely old man about to be swept aside by progress. She had no idea she was the one on the chopping block. Her lawyer went first, rehashing the same story. He presented his client's brand new survey, spoke of my unfortunate confusion, and my refusal to accept the updated and legally filed property lines. He was smooth, professional, and completely full of it. When the judge asked Karen to speak, she stood up and addressed the court with a practiced, charming sorrow. "Your Honor," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "we have the utmost respect for Mr. Brenner and his long history in the community. But this is sad, really. He's an old man living in the past, and he can't accept that things change." The HOA board nodded along gravely. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. They were the reasonable ones. I was the relic. Their lawyer sat down, and a heavy silence filled the room. The judge looked at me over her reading glasses, a tired expression on her face. "Mr. Brenner," she said, "do you have anything to present to the court?" This was the moment they were all waiting for. The moment the old man would pull out his dusty deed and be politely dismissed. But it wasn't me who stood up. A man in a simple gray suit sitting in the back row rose, walked past the bar, and set a thick binder on the table next to mine. This was David Davies, an attorney I'd hired weeks ago. He specialized in land disputes and had a reputation for being quiet, methodical, and absolutely relentless. The whispers started immediately. Karen Mallory's smile tightened at the edges. Mr. Davies didn't grandstand. He just turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, we have a few exhibits we'd like to present." He set up a large monitor facing the judge's bench. The first thing on the screen was a high-resolution aerial photograph. A bright red line was drawn across it. "This red line," Mr. Davies said, his voice calm and even, "represents the property boundary as defined by the original 1932 plat map and confirmed by a 1959 court-ordered quitclaim deed, copies of which are in your binder." Then he played a video. It was my drone footage, time-stamped, showing the first bulldozer crossing that red line. He fast-forwarded through months of construction, every frame showing 42 cabins being built squarely on the wrong side of that line. The room was silent. Next, he presented Anita Flores' certified survey. It was over 100 pages long, filled with precise measurements, historical cross-references, and satellite data. It wasn't an opinion, it was math. It was an ironclad, court-certified document that showed not just a minor encroachment, but a massive land grab. Karen's lawyer jumped to his feet with an objection, but Mr. Davies was already moving to the next exhibit. Up on the screen popped a series of screenshots. They were from the HOA's own website and their Airbnb listings. "Enjoy exclusive access to our private lake," Mr. Davies read aloud. "Nightly rentals starting at $400. He turned to the judge. "Not only did the HOA build on land they do not own, they began a commercial enterprise, profiting from Mr. Brenner's property and illegally advertising his private lake as their own." The final blow came when he called his only witness. Corey Denton walked to the stand, looking nervous but determined. Mr. Davies established who he was and then asked him one simple question. Mr. Denton, can you confirm that you have a record of a registered letter from Mr. Brenner being delivered to and signed for by the Bluffs HOA? Corey confirmed the date, a date that was 2 weeks before the main construction began. Then, Mr. Davies played the HOA's own promotional video, the one of them destroying my grandfather's cornerstone. He paused it on the shot of the jackhammer. So, Your Honor, he said, turning back to the judge, weeks after being formally notified of a land title dispute, the HOA board knowingly and deliberately destroyed the primary historical survey marker for the property in question. The air went out of the room. The judge took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. She leaned forward, her voice low and sharp, and looked directly at Karen's lawyer. Let me be clear, she said. Are you telling me that your client's entire Phase 2 development, all 42 of those cabins, are sitting on his land? Karen Mallory shot up from her chair. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. The judge slammed her hand down on the desk, not with a gavel, but with the flat of her palm. The sound cracked through the courtroom. Sit down, Mrs. Mallory, not another word. Karen froze, her mouth open, and slowly sank back into her seat, her face pale. The judge turned to me. Mr. Brenner, why did you let them build it? Why didn't you file an injunction months ago? Everyone leaned in. For the first time all day I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the dead silent room. I let them build, I said, looking right at Karen. I let them rent. I let them profit. I also let them hang themselves. A ripple went through the courtroom. The judge stared at me for a long moment, then a slow, almost imperceptible nod. She picked up her gavel. Bang. A temporary injunction is hereby granted. All commercial and construction activity must cease immediately. The ownership of the parcel is subject to a full evidentiary hearing, but, frankly, she added, glaring at the HOA's lawyer, I don't expect it will take long. In the back of the room, I heard the sound of cameras. A local news reporter was snapping photos, the flashes lighting up Karen Mallory's face, which had collapsed into a mask of pure, horrified shock. The story broke that evening. The local news channel led their 6 o'clock broadcast with it, using a picture of me on the courthouse steps and a photo of Karen Mallory looking horrified. The headline was simple and brutal. Local veteran fights HOA over land theft. They had interviewed a legal analyst who explained in very simple terms that the HOA had built a multi-million-dollar resort on property they likely never owned. The HOA tried to spin it, of course. They released a statement full of words like unfortunate boundary discrepancy and good faith error. They called an emergency public meeting for the next night, trying to get ahead of the story and control the narrative. They had no idea the narrative had already bolted from the barn and was halfway to the next county. I decided to go to the meeting. I arrived late on purpose, slipping into the back of the community hall just as Karen was taking the stage. Every single chair was filled. This wasn't just the usual group of retirees who attended these things. The room was packed with angry-looking homeowners, people who had bought into the Bluffs development with their life savings. I saw the young couple who had bought the lot next to mine. I saw families who had probably sunk everything into what they thought was a dream home. Karen stood at the podium, forcing that familiar bright smile, but her eyes were darting around the room, full of panic. I know there are a lot of concerns, she began, her voice straining to sound calm and in control. This is all just a misunderstanding, a paperwork issue that our lawyers are sorting out as we speak. Everything is going to be fine. She was trying to put a bandage on a bullet wound. From the back of the room, a man stood up. I recognized him. He'd bought one of the new Phase 2 lots 6 months ago. A misunderstanding, he yelled, his voice shaking with anger. I have a $500,000 construction loan for a house that's apparently built on some other guy's land. What am I supposed to do? The room erupted. People started shouting questions from all corners. Karen's smile faltered. She held up her hands, pleading for quiet. Please, let's be civil. This is a simple zoning overlay issue. She was throwing out jargon, trying to confuse them, to make it sound boring and bureaucratic. It wasn't working. The anger in the room was a living thing, and it was growing hotter by the second. That's when I decided to walk forward. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked slowly up the center aisle, the accordion folder under my arm. The shouting died down as people turned to look at me. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. I walked right up to the front, stood next to the podium, and turned to face the crowd. Karen stared at me, her face a mixture of fury and fear. "Mr. Brenner, this is a private meeting," she hissed. I ignored her. I opened my folder and pulled out the old deed, its paper soft and yellowed with age. "This document was filed in 1934, I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the silent hall. "It describes the boundaries of my family's land. It's been the same for 90 years. Then I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "This," I said, holding it up, "is my grandfather's original bill of sale. It includes a specific clause." I put on my reading glasses and read it aloud. "And all appurtenant rights, including but not limited to riparian rights, full shoreline control, and exclusive surface use of the body of water, commonly known as Brenner's Lake." I paused and looked up at the crowd. "For those of you who don't speak lawyer," I said, "that means I don't just own the land under the water. I own the water itself, every drop, every fish, every reflection of the sky. Anyone putting a boat on it, or even a toe in it, without my permission, is trespassing." The dam broke. The first person to react was a woman in the third row. "So we paid $600 a night for a cabin that was trespassing, so we could trespass in a lake we were told we had private access to?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. A young man who had invested his retirement savings into buying one of the rental cabins outright screamed at Karen, his face bright red. "You told me this was a guaranteed return. I borrowed against my 401k. You lied to us. You lied to all of us." The room exploded into chaos. The board members sitting behind Karen started looking at each other, their faces pale. Martin Tully, the compliance officer, was trying to shrink into his chair. Their wall of smug authority had completely crumbled. In its place was just a room full of people realizing they'd been had. Amidst the shouting, the HOA vice president, a quiet accountant I'd never seen speak before, stood up. He walked to the podium and took the microphone from Karen's trembling hand. "I'd like to call for an immediate vote," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "A vote of no confidence in our current president, Sharon Mallory." The motion was seconded so fast it sounded like an echo. A show of hands went up. It was nearly unanimous. Karen just stood there, stunned as her fake power evaporated right in front of her. But her night wasn't over. As she was trying to gather her things, a side door to the hall opened. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped inside. One of them walked directly up to her. "Sharon Mallory," he said, his voice polite but firm, "you're being served." He handed her a summons. As the room watched in stunned silence, he continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is for civil trespass, commercial fraud, and filing a false instrument under oath with the county court." She just stared at the papers in her hand, the whole world she had built turning to dust around her. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, at least for them. Karen Mallory tried to fight, of course. She hired a new lawyer and filed a flurry of counterclaims, accusing me of everything from malicious prosecution to emotional distress. It didn't matter. Her reputation in the community was shattered. The state real estate board launched an investigation into her license, prompted by a dozen complaints from the same people who had voted her out. Word travels fast in a small town. The surveying firm owned by her brother-in-law was suddenly facing a state audit. It turns out, when you pull one crooked thread, the whole rotten tapestry starts to unravel. The HOA, without Karen at the helm, was a ship without a rudder, taking on water fast. The investors who had financed the Phase 2 cabins sued the entire board for gross negligence. The homeowners whose properties were now effectively worthless sued them for fraud. The whole enterprise collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and bad press. Within 6 months, the Bluffs HOA was forced to declare bankruptcy. The fancy signs came down, the landscaping withered, and the 42 brand new cabins sat empty on my ridge, silent monuments to greed and arrogance. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, called me into his office one sunny afternoon. The bankruptcy court had worked out a settlement. The HOA's assets were being liquidated, and their primary creditor, the bank that financed the whole mess, wanted to clear the title on the land the cabins were sitting on. They made me an offer. They would pay off all legal fees, clear the land of the cabins if I wished, and pay me an additional sum for damages. It was a good offer, a fair one. I turned it down. The bank, desperate to recoup some of their losses, came back with another offer, They wanted to buy the land under the cabins and the cabins themselves from me, free and clear. The offer was for $2.4 million. Mr. Davies sat back in his chair, a little smile on his face. "Jack," he said, "this is a winning lottery ticket. You'd be set for life. You should take it." I looked out his window at the busy street below. I thought about the money. I thought about how easy it would be to just sign the paper, walk away, and never think about any of this again. I could buy a new truck, travel, fix up the house. But then I thought of Eleanor, standing on that ridge, talking about a quiet place for the boys to come home to. The money wasn't the point. It was never the point. "No, thank you," I told him. "I'll keep it. I think I'm going to build that retreat after all." Mr. Davies just nodded slowly, like he knew that's what I'd say all along. He told me the bank would have no choice but to cede the cabins to me as permanent fixtures on my land. In the eyes of the law, because they had built them there after being notified of the dispute, they were a gift. 42 brand new, fully furnished cabins were now mine. Life settled back into a quiet rhythm, but things had changed. Corey, the young intern from the records office, got a full-time job with the county. His work on my case had earned him a reputation as a sharp, tenacious researcher. A few months later, he was promoted to lead investigator in the land use department. The first person he hired as a consultant was a no-nonsense surveyor named Anita Flores. They became the county's new power team, a pair of professionals dedicated to making sure bullies couldn't win just by having shinier paperwork. We still have lunch once a month. I spent the rest of that year working. I hired a few local guys, veterans from the VFW hall, and we started converting the cabins. We took down some walls, combined a few of the units to make a larger common area, and built wheelchair ramps for the entrances. The work was hard, but it felt good. It felt right. We were taking something built from arrogance and turning it into something meant for healing. Last week I finished the last project. I walked down to the edge of the water, right where the HOA had planned to put their private dock. I dug 2 holes and set a wooden post in each one. Between them, I hung a simple carved wooden sign. The letters were painted a soft blue, Eleanor's favorite color. It read, "Lake Eleanor, private property, veterans welcome." I stood there for a long time, watching the sunlight glitter on the water. The wind rustled through the old pines on the ridge behind me, the same trees that had watched over my wife's ashes. I thought about everything that had happened, the anger, the fight, the quiet victory. That lake had always given me peace. It was her favorite place on earth. I just gave it back to her.